Today we are looking at the concept of exception handling. Okay. All right. So what are exceptions? Okay. So basically exceptions are what we call runtime error. Runtime error in your program. So there are different types of error that we encounter when we are writing program. Okay, there are different kinds of error we encounter when we write a program. Okay? And exceptions, okay, are one of them. If you remember from previous semester, we looked at the various types, or we talked about the various types of error, okay, in programming. Talked about the syntax error. I said the syntax error are the types of error that occur when the syntax, okay, the syntax or the grammar behind the language you are writing is wrong. Then there's also the runtime error. The runtime error is the type of error that occurs after compilation. So when you run the code and you are expecting your, sorry, you run the code and you are expecting your output. Okay, that is when you encounter a runtime error. Just a moment. Okay. So we're talking about the various types of error. So I mentioned the syntax error. So like I said, the syntax error, they are one of the easiest error that you can spot when you are writing a program. So they occur when you don't follow the rules of the language. So if you take Java programming language, there's a grammar behind how you write, or there are rules or structures behind how you write a Java program. Okay, so if you don't follow those rules, you end up getting a syntax error. Okay, some of which are maybe you write a code and then you leave out your semicolon. Okay, you write a code and then maybe you start with an open curly bracket. You then end with another curly bracket, or you misspell a word and so on. These are all examples of syntax error. Then we have runtime error. So runtime error, like I said, they are the type of error that occur during the execution of a program, when your program is running. So for instance, if you do write a code that says 2 plus 2, okay, you are expecting an answer to be 4, but first the code has to be compiled. Okay, so it's after the phase of compilation when the computer now understands your program or the code that has been translated into zeros and ones, then it can give you your output. Okay, or you can, yes, it can give you your output. Okay, so that is the point where the runtime error occurs. Okay, and then we have the other types of error like the logical error, which also occurs occurs when the program is expected to run. Okay, so these are usually considered to be the hardest type of error because of how they occur. Okay, so a typical example can be maybe when you are writing a program and maybe within a conditions, you do not write the or you are writing a program, maybe an if-else statement or a loop, and there are some conditional statements in there, okay, and you don't set those conditions rightly, okay, so those conditional statements, they use what we call, we have the relational operator or the conditional operator, the greater than, less than, and so on. And then we have the logical operators, okay, also in play over there. So if you don't use those conditional statements very well, you end up getting what we call the logical error. Okay, so that is also another type of error. Then there's the semantic error. We know semantics as meaning, okay, of a statement. Okay, so there are times where you write a statement and you end up getting a semantic error. A typical example happens when you are performing mathematical computation and then you are dividing maybe by a value that it's incorrect. Okay, so, or maybe you are dividing by 0 and so on. That can also lead to a semantic error. Okay, so these are the main types of error that we have. But our focus today is on the runtime error, which is also known as exception. Runtime error, also known as exception. So what are these runtime errors? Just like I said, these are errors that occur during the execution of your program. Okay, so they occur while a program is running if the Java virtual machine detects an operation that is impossible to carry out. Okay, the JVM, which is one of the components of compiling your Java code. Okay, that's like the final phase of compilation of your Java code, converting the bytecode into what the machine understands and then gives you your output. Okay, so he said this runtime error occur while a program is running if the Java virtual machine detects an operation that is impossible to carry out. Okay, so take note of this, an operation that is impossible to carry out. Okay, so example has been given over here. He said if you access an array using an index, okay, that is not within the range, okay, that is out of bound, then that will give you a runtime error. For instance, we are a class or a lecture hall has been set up to take 20 students, okay, for examination purposes, 20 students, and every student has been assigned a student ID, okay, a student ID, or not necessarily, let's say a seat number. Every student has been assigned a seat number. Okay, so 20 students, that means the first person will take seat 1, seat 2, and so on. Okay, then someone appears and the person says he or she is seat number 21. Okay, so at that moment, you will tell that no, that person doesn't fall within the range of seats available in that classroom. Okay, so you'll say that that person is out of bound. Or there are even times we go to offices or you go to, I'm sure some of you, your workplaces, they've put in a poster there that this particular office is out of bound. It's for staff only. Okay, so if someone is trying to get access to that particular office, it raises some questions when the person is not a staff, okay, but is trying to get access to that office. Okay, so that is how exceptions happen in program. And with the example I just gave, is called an array index out of bound exception. Okay, so there are different types of exception. Okay, another example here is saying that if you enter a double value when your program is expecting an integer. Okay, so you've declared a variable as int. Then in executing the task, in running, you've run the you've run the program, or you've run the program, and then you assign a double value to that particular variable that was declared as an integer. Then you end up getting what we call a runtime error or an exception. And this exception is known as the input mismatch exception. Okay, because you are saying the variable or the value of that variable should be an integer. But this is the case, you are entering a double value, a decimal value for that variable. So that will also lead to what we call an exception. Okay, so exception handling is one of the ways of dealing with this runtime error in your program. Okay, so exception handling is the way of dealing with runtime error in your program. Okay, else your program will not run correctly. The program will run all right, okay, but you will not get the necessary output that you want, okay, the output that you require from that particular program. Okay. So it says here that in Java programming, errors or runtime errors are thrown as exceptions. Now, an exception is an object, okay? It's an object that represents an error or a condition that prevents execution from proceeding normally. So it stops the program from running normally, okay? To just end abnormally, to just terminate, the program will just terminate abnormally, okay? So what do? You have to set some exceptions within the code so that even if someone attempts to enter a value or perform some operation that is not within the context of the program you've written, okay, these exceptions can handle the program so that it doesn't end abnormally. The program will still run, but give you some message to prompt you that, oh, you made a mistake here, or you didn't enter the right value, and so on. Are we following?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right. All right, so let's look at the syntax of an exception. Okay. Exceptions are thrown from a method. Okay, take note of that. Exceptions are thrown from a method. Okay. Now, we said that exceptions are what? They are objects. And last week we learned from last week's class that objects have what? Attributes or states and behaviors or methods. Okay, so exceptions are thrown from a method, which is an aspect of an object. Okay, so that means that exceptions will flow within the context of objects, okay, how we perceive an object to be. Now, it says the caller of the method can catch and handle the exception. Now, exceptions are objects, and objects are defined using classes. Okay, just like we saw from last week. Now, the root class for exception is the java.lang.throwable. That's the root class. Okay, so anytime we introduce an exception in a program, automatically this class has to be created. Okay, because it is from this class that we can throw the exception method. Okay, now let me break it down. Let's look at the syntax first and foremost. Okay, so there are 3 keywords, okay, that you should know when it comes to using exceptions in your program. 3 keywords. The first keyword is try. Try. Okay. So the try keyword here comes with an open curly bracket, and then there's a closed curly bracket. Okay, so we call it the try block. Then the next one is catch. So this is the catch block. Okay, then the third is what we call the throw. Okay, but we'll look at it in the example. Okay. So let's look at the try. So anytime you write a code, okay, the try part, so let's say you want to say, let's say 1 plus 1, okay. Let's say, let's say you've done 1 plus 1. Or let's say, let's say you are doing x, a plus b. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
You are doing a plus b, and you are expecting a result, okay? However, you declare the a as an integer and b as also an integer, okay? Now, this aspect of the program is supposed to give you an integer value, which we can say is c. Okay, give you an integer value, which we can say is c. Okay, so that means that this aspect of your program okay, is correct, or it will only be correct if the person enters integer values. It will only be correct if the person enters integer values. So we bring this part of the code into our try block. Okay, that's to say that they said the statement or the method that may throw an exception. Okay, so you run the code. So this is like the proper code without error. What you are expecting from the code. So if I do a plus b, I'm expecting c. Okay, so that part of the code should be within your try block. Okay, now the catch is where the exception is handled. Okay, it handles the exception. Now, if you look at the catch very well, right after the catch, we have what? Type, okay, type ES, right? I hope we can all see that, type ES, okay? So the type ES over here is just saying that you should enter as parameter here the type of exception you are trying to handle. Okay, so usually at this point, if you know this type of exception you are trying to handle, you put that exception name here. Okay, however, if you don't know, there are times you don't know, you might not know the actual type of exception you are trying to handle by name. Okay. So in order to be free, just put the generic word exception there. Okay, instead of specifying the type, just put inside the exception. Okay, exception EX or exception E. This one is the EX here is just a variable name. Okay, so it can change. Some people usually do exception or exception E or exception EX. Okay. Then here within the catch block, you write in a particular statement, okay, which you want to send to the person as a message. So for instance, instead of int, the person enters a double value for A. Okay, the person enters a double value for A. Now, because in your declaration of A, you said A should be int. You didn't say A should be double. So if someone enters a double value, what will happen is that it will skip the try and come to the catch and execute what is in the catch. So you, in your statement, you just put in a message and then say, maybe you can give a message that maybe you can say the value of A should be int. Okay, not double or not a decimal number. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that is how you handle exceptions in program. Okay, so this is how the syntax works. So once you enter an integer value, for A and B, then you should be expecting an integer value for C. Okay, so that falls within how you want the code to work. However, if you enter a different value, maybe double for A and then integer for C, which doesn't follow the right way, then automatically it's not going to execute the double you've entered here. Rather, it's going to give you, if you enter double here for your A, it's not going to execute the try, but rather move you to the catch and then give you a message that your value or the value of A should not be double. Okay. So this is some of the ways we handle or we handle, let's say, developing an application and then try to put in a login page. Okay, so login, you prompt the person to enter the name or username. Okay, username. So you are given a field to enter the username and then password. Enter username and password. So if the person enters the username and the username is correct and the password is wrong, your program should not end without giving any information as to the fact that maybe you enter a wrong password or something. Okay, if your program ends abnormally, okay, if your program ends abnormally, then it means that you didn't handle exception in your program. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So if you introduce exception in the program, it will prompt the person, maybe password or password mismatch or wrong password, enter again. There will be a message that will pop up for the person. And that message that pops up is the message you put within the catch. Okay, that's the message that will pop up for the person to re-enter the password. Okay. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's look at some of the methods or the classes that we have within the true or the exception class. So we have, first we said it's an object, okay, and the object will from the class name java.lang.throwable. Okay. Now it gives you, the throwable gives you two types of error, one an exception and one an error. Okay, so this error leads to what we call the link error, virtual machine error, and so on. These are more technically related error. Okay, the linkage error. Okay, these are more technically related. However, this error, which is the exception, the one here, is the runtime error. So this has to do with the code you have written, okay, and the output you are expecting. So you can see here, we have some classes, the class not found exception. Okay, so this type of exception happens when you've written a code and you are trying to call a class or extend to a class. Okay, so if that class has not been created, okay, then it gives you class not found exception. Okay, and some of these things, you'll be seeing some of this error in a more detailed way when we start using the graphical user interface and adding databases and so on. Okay, and arrays and so on. You experience a lot of this exception. Then IO exception. Okay, IO exception. So this has to do with input and output. This has to do with input and output. This has to do with input and output. Okay, so this is the general class name. Then we have another exception, which is the runtime exception. A runtime exception. So under the runtime exceptions, we have the arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, index out of bound exception, illegal argument exception. Okay. So arithmetic exception, we'll be looking at an example on this. Then null pointer exception. Okay, so the null pointer exception is also another type of runtime exception. Okay, the null pointer exception is thrown when a program attempts to use a particular object which has a null value as its reference. Okay, then we have index out of bound exception, index out of bound exception, which we looked at earlier. So you are declaring an array. Okay, you said the array should take 10 elements, and you are adding an 11th element to the array. That 11th element makes it out of bound. Then we have the illegal argument. So you have written a method. So let's say a method that says, let's say int. We've done methods. So int sum. And then you introduce the variable a, and then int b, int b, and then you return. So if you are summing, you return a plus b. Okay, this is your method. Now, in calling this method, if you are calling the method, you said int ab. Okay, you are calling the method. When you call the method, you use the method name sum, and then you enter the argument. The arguments are supposed to be integer values. Okay, so if I enter 4 here, and here I enter maybe b or a, or any value that is not an integer value, this value that I've entered here, b, is not an integer. Okay. It's not an integer. So it will lead us to what we call illegal argument exception. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So those are some of the exceptions in Java. You can go and search for more exceptions and how they are used. Okay. But for now, let's look at an example on the arithmetic exception. Okay, we look at some 3 examples on this. Now the examples will be building on each other. We look at it from the simple perspective, how to handle it in a simple way. Then we'll build upon that, how to handle it using if else. So if statements, how to handle it using a method, and then how to handle it with an exception, the proper way. Okay. So this code here is basically looking at how to add 2 numbers. Okay, or to perform find the quotient of 2 numbers. Okay, so if you are finding the quotient of 2 numbers, let's say you have the first number, which is number 1. Okay, divided, so quotient. Sum is addition. Product is multiplication. Quotient, division. So the quotient of 2 numbers is number 1 divided by number 2. Or you can also say A divided by B. A divided by B. Okay. So where the A is our numerator, and then B, the denominator, or number 2, the denominator. Okay. Now we know in mathematics, okay, from basic mathematics, that you don't divide a number by 0. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We can't divide a number by 0. when we do that, from our calculators and all that we use, it gives us what? The calculator will tell you syntax error, or give you an error, okay? But in terms of programming, this will lead to, or Java programming, this will lead to an exception, okay? Where in this case, it falls within the context of an arithmetic exception because you are performing some arithmetic computation. Okay, so this will lead to an arithmetic exception because what we are doing here has to do with arithmetic. We are using the operators, division, and so on. Okay, so that is the program we want to look at. When we have that kind of error where the denominator is 0, and we get an arithmetic exception, how do we handle it? How can we handle this exception? Okay, so I'll move straight to IntelliJ. We'll try out or write out this code and then see how to handle the exception. There's a hand up, Angela. You have a question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, please, I wanted to ask, so what if you are dividing and then you get a decimal number and you've used integer? Maybe the value is given to you, you end up getting maybe a decimal number.
As in,
You run into an error.
so that means number A and B are integers, right?
Yes,
And then you divide and your value for the quotient is
a decimal.
a decimal number. Yes,
Yes.
to give it to you, it will print it out as a decimal number, depending on the data type you used over here.
So then, is it advisable to use float instead of integer?
And it depends.
Okay.
Usually what happens is that if you use decimal, if you use int and the number is float, I think we did this in Java, if you in C++, if you remember.
Yes.
Okay, if you use int and the value is a decimal number, what do you think will happen?
So it will run into an error.
Oh, are you sure?
Sir, please come again, the question.
So, for instance, our answer for the quotient, you've entered 2 integer numbers and you've divided them. However, your answer will be a decimal number, but you declared it as an integer. What do
So
you
it
think?
is not a decimal.
Is someone speaking?
So it will display the decimal part. It will display the whole number and leave the decimal part.
And leave the, okay, so maybe we did the division and then we had 6.5. But because we said it's an integer, it will omit and then take 6 as the answer. Okay, remember we did this in C++.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what will happen here. But what I'm talking about over here is when you have declared it as not in terms of the computation, okay, but in terms of you assigning values to it. That is when it will give you the mismatch, input mismatch.
Okay.
Okay. Or you've declared this as integer, just like I've done here. You declared it as integer, int b. Then when you come to entering the value for it, instead of entering an integer value, you are entering a character b. Okay. These are all out of context, so they give you exception. But in this particular approach, it is performing the calculation, the computation, Okay, so what will happen is that because you have declared this as int, it will just omit the value. This time you are not the one entering the value for the variable you declared. Rather, it will perform the computation and then give you the answer.
Ah, okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you're welcome. So let's go to IntelliJ and then try out this code. Okay, so I'll create a project. So I'll name this project exception handling. All right, so we create a class. Right click, create a class. So I'm going to name this class quotient. Or let's create a package first. So com.quotient. So inside the package, you create class. So I'll name this class quotient. So now let's write our program. So we use our public static void main. And then we use our public static void main. Then we introduce our scanner. So we'll be performing input. Okay, yeah, performing input. So we introduce our scanner input equals new scanner.
System.in.
So we introduce our system.out to prompt for the values to be entered. So we say enter two integers. So we declare the first integer. So we say a equals, to accept the input, we use input from the scanner with our next int. And then we do that for B as well. Then after this, we output our results. We output our results. So we say, A divided by concatenate, sorry. A divided by B is we put here A slash B. Okay. So this is a simple program to divide two numbers. Let me just find the quotient of two numbers. Okay. All right, so let's run this program and see what we'll get as our output. Okay, so we enter the numbers. I enter the first one, maybe 6, and then 2. And it says 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay. So we run it again. I enter 6, and this time around, I divide by 0. Okay. So can we all see this?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So it said the exception in thread, that's main. So it's telling us that the exception is happening within the main method. Okay, in thread main. Then it gives us the class. Okay, so the class will always start with what? Java.lang. Okay, and we saw from the material. It said the root class is what? That's a throwable. Okay, which is this one. This is the root class. Okay. However, within that class, you have the other classes, and this is the exception, the arithmetic exception class we are experiencing in this particular example. So it says here that java.lang.arithmetic exception. Can we all see that?
Yes, sir.
Now, what is that arithmetic exception? Yeah. It said you are dividing by what? 0. Okay, so dividing by 0. That's what is giving us that exception. And then it's showing us where that exception is taking place. So at com.quotient is the name of our package, and then the class name dot quotient, that's the class name, dot main, that's the method name. Okay, and then it's showing us the line where the exception occurred. That's what at line 11. So line 11, which is this line, this is where we're performing that division. Simply put, we can just say int c equals a divided by b. And then put here c. Okay. So in this context, where do you think the error will occur? Which line do you think the exception will occur? Anyone?
Yeah, line 11.
Okay, so still line 11. Okay, because this is where we are performing the computation, a divided by b. So it will occur in line 11. Okay, so 6, 0. Exception at line 11, where the error is occurring. Okay. So now that we've seen this error, how do we handle it? So like I said, there are 3 ways in which we can handle exception. Okay. At the beginner level, you can use what we call the if-else. Okay, but at the moment, you guys are beyond beginners. You have jumped from Java 1 to Java 2. So you are no longer beginners. But we'll still look at how to go about it. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll create another class and call that class quotient with if. Quotient with if. I'll copy the same code from here with the main method, paste it here, include my scanner, and then run it. Okay, I've not imported the scanner. Do so. So 6 divided by 0. So that's giving us the exception. Okay. All right. Now, how do we handle this exception? Using the if statement. Okay, it's simple. It's just by saying that it's just by writing an if-else statement, okay, to say that this is what is causing the problem, is the B. Do we all agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's the B that is causing the problem. So we need to come up with a condition, okay, that says that the value of B should not be 0. Are we all here? The value of B should not be equal to 0. So that once we put in that condition, it should be able to what? Handle our output. Okay. So after entering my values, okay, for the input, okay, then I introduce an if statement, or we introduce an if statement and say that if B is not equal to 0, okay, or we can say if B is equal to 0, whichever way we want to start with. If B is not equal to 0, then we should perform the following operation. So I'll put the whole code here. Are you following?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
So if b is not equal to 0, then in fact, let me take this out, make it a bit shorter. So we say C equals A divided by B, and then we output C. However, if C is 0, that's the else, we should output a statement and say just copy this and paste here and say the value of B cannot be 0. The value of B cannot be 0. Okay. So our initial code is this. So you notice the if else statement is just handling this part of the code. Okay, the correct part of the code, which is supposed to give it as the output we want, is this line 11 and line 12. Now we put that line 11 and line 12 inside what? Our if statement. So that if our value of B is not 0, the code will run correctly. However, if our value of B is 0, what happens? It should tell us what? The value of B cannot be 0. Okay. So for beginners, this is how you handle an exception in a program. Okay, so let's run this code and see what we'll get if we use the same values. Right. So 6 and then 2, that's giving us what? 3. 6 divided by 2 is 3. When we run the code again and we do 6 and 0, it says what? The value of B cannot be 0. So instead of getting an exception, okay, like we saw in the previous example, because we've used the if-else statement, we've been able to avoid that exception, okay, popping up when we divide by 0. Are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Angela.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Angela.
Yeah, so okay, which means that because of the statement, does it mean when it showcases the statement, then it ends the program? I was wondering, can't it like refer you back to maybe enter an integer or something?
Yes, you can do that.
Oh, okay.
How can you do that? As a programmer, what do you think you have to do?
You debug.
You have to use a looping statement.
Loop.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So after the else, you introduce a loop to handle it. Okay, to repeat the if statement again, or to start that process again. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that is how to go the simple way using the if statement. Okay. Now the next one is the use of a method. So I'll create another class in the package and name it quotient with method. Okay, even though we are going to use a method, it will require the the use of the if else statement as well. Okay. So let's look at how we can use a method to handle something like this. So within our class quotient with method, we are going to write a method that will find the quotient. So we say public static int quotient int A and int B. Now, ideally, this method should return A divided by B. Are we all here? You agree?
Yes, sir.
Okay, ideally,
Yes,
this
sir.
method should return A divided by B. Then we can enter our main method. So public static void main for our main method, where I'll just copy this code and paste it here. So the scanner input. Sorry, let me add this part to it. Okay. So this is performing the same thing as this code. It's just the same thing as the first code we wrote. However, we've introduced a method here. Okay, so we've introduced the method and, oh, sorry, we are supposed to call the method here. So int C, which will give us the answer. So this time, instead of C, C equals A divided by B, we are going to call the method here. So you can see, let me just put a comment here and say calling the quotient method. So we are calling the quotient method. How do we call it? So we say int C is equal to quotient. So as you can see, a quotient into bracket, int A, int B. That's what we have here. Okay, so int A, so what's the value of A? Let's say 6. Okay, or we can just do it AB. Okay, A and then B, because we are being prompted to enter the value of A and B from here, line 14 and 15. Okay, so when we run this code, enter numbers. So I enter 6 and then 0. And then you can see that what is giving us an exception. Okay, so just like we read from the first one. So this time it says com.quotient with method. So it's giving us 2 aspects of the error. The first one is line 8. Okay, and that line 8 is here, where we are performing the division. The next one is line 17. And that line 17 is here, where we are calling the method. Okay, so that means that the error is occurring within the method. So we have to solve this from the method before coming to solve this from the quotient method before coming to address it inside our main method. Okay, but in using of the if-else statement, we can handle everything within the main method. Okay, so that error, once we resolve it in the main method, when we come to the class, when we come to the calling that method, it will address, or because it has been addressed inside the quotient method, the main method will execute our task without an exception. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. The same approach. So we said what our value should not be greater than 0. Okay. Sorry, should not be equal to 0. So in this case, we can use another approach, vice versa, and say if b is equal to 0. So the previous example, we did it when b wasn't equal to 0. Okay, so this time we say if b is equal to 0, then we should output the statement b cannot be equal to 0. So in this case, if you want to introduce your loop, you introduce the loop in this approach. And then we can put the system.exit, okay, to end the program. Okay, so what we've done over here is to handle the exception, which is being caused by the denominator being 0. Okay, we've done that here. So let's run the code again and see if this will handle our exception. Okay, so we can see here, it says the value of b cannot be 0. Okay, cannot be 0. So that is we handling it inside the method. Okay, we are handling the exception inside our method. Any questions so far before we look at the final way of handling it using the exception handling keywords or technique? Any question? All right, there's no question. Let's create another class.
Yeah.
Yes, Joel.
Please, can you go over it again?
Oh, this one. I'll upload the video and then you watch it.
Okay.
I'll upload the video so that you watch it. Okay. So what I'm saying is just the same thing we've done with the first and second one. However, this one, we've created a method. Okay, instead of doing a plus b, a divided by b for the quotient, this time we created a method and gave it the argument a and b. Okay, but when we return the value and we call the method quotient method here, it gave us an exception. Okay, so we said that in this case, you have to handle the exception still using the if statement. You have to handle it inside the method. Okay, so once we've handled it in the method, anytime we call it, because it's been handled in the method, it won't show or give us an exception again. Okay, it will just give us the message that our value or the value of p is 0 or cannot be 0.
So please explain the status 1.
This status is automatically generated. It's just you saying that system.exit. So that's why when you run the code, you get exit over there. And the value there is 1. So it says that when you run the code, at the end of the code, you see some comment, some text written there. Okay, so this one is saying that what? Process with exit what? 0. Okay, so 0 to end the code. Whereas the one, when you use 1, it will say process and press exit 1 or value 1 to exit the code. That's what it means. All right, so we are creating a new class still in the same package, and we name this class the quotient with exception. Quotient with exception. Quotient with exception. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll copy this same code with the method here, copy, and then paste. Then I'll delete this if statement we had here. So originally this was our program to give us the, to call the method and then give us our output. Okay. However, we didn't use the if. We don't have the if here. So anytime we run and we divide by 0, it's going to give us an exception. Okay, so let's look at how we can handle the exception in this program. Okay. Now I mentioned some keywords. One of the keywords we said is try. The other keyword is the
Catch.
okay, the catch keyword. All right. So another way of handling this exception, like I said, the try part is where the code is performing the task it is meant to perform. Okay, the task the code is meant to perform is to divide A plus A by B, A divided by B, and then give us the output. Okay, so what we'll do is that part of the program, we'll put it inside our try. Okay, so whatever I've selected here, I'm going to cut it and then now introduce my try block. Okay. So you can see try curly brackets or the braces open and close. And then after that, I introduce the catch. Okay. So this is the syntax, how it should look like. Okay. Now inside the try, I'm coming to paste my calculation of the quotient. So C is equal to the quotient from here. Okay. AB, then output the value of C. Okay. So that's the try part. Now the catch part, we said what it will take some parameters or some arguments. Okay. And I said, if you don't know the type of exception you are supposed to handle, you can just put the exception. Okay, so exception may be E or ES or exception. Okay, it's for this one, it's an object. So whichever name you give it should work. Whichever variable name you type there should work. Okay. Now, if you know the actual exception you are handling in your code, then you can type the correct name there. So in this case, it is what? Arithmetic exception. Now you can see other exceptions and errors showing there. So the array out of bound and so on. But in my case, or in our case, the arithmetic exception. Okay. Then within here, we put in a statement, okay, that says whatever statement you want to put in there. So you can say maybe, let me just copy the statement we've been using so far, which is this. So I'll just put it in here. Are you following the syntax?
Yes, sir.
So it's just like here. So just like what we've done here. So instead of doing the if else, okay, we are doing what? Try and then catch. So the try is going to hold the computation part of the code, which is correct, which is what we want to do. The value, the correct answer that we want will come within the try. Then the catch will throw the message. Okay, we'll identify if the value is 0. So if the B we entered is 0, it will not execute the try. It will skip the try and then come to the catch and give us the message, the value B cannot be 0. Okay, so let's run this. Enter the values of A, 6, and then B as 0. And now you can see what it's telling us, the value of B cannot be 0. Okay, because we have used what? An exception. Okay, the catch part of the exception. When we run it again, and we use 2, 6, and 2, it's giving us what? 3, because that is the try part, the part within the try block. So we use the correct value instead of using 0, we use a positive integer, in this case 2. Any question?
Yeah.
Any question?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, please, can you come again?
Which part?
Sir, please, from the 10th part downwards.
From where?
The 10th part, public
Oh, this
static void.
has been the old code we've been writing. No? The main class, the old main class we've been writing throughout. Nothing has changed there. Nothing has changed. The only thing we have added here, look at the previous one. So this was
Okay.
the where we call the method here quotient, A divided by B, or AB,
Okay.
and then we output it. So the only thing we've done is that we've put this where we've done the calculation of A divided by B and outputting C. We've just put that inside the try block.
Okay.
Try block.
Okay, sir.
We put that in the try block. Then we introduce the catch block. So the catch block is like the message we put inside our else, that it cannot be.
Okay.
We put that message in the catch, because the catch is where it will tell the value of B to be 0. In fact, where the exception is happening, the catch will throw this message. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Emmanuel, what's your question?
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sir, please, I wanted to ask if you can write the exception in the function rather instead of the main content.
Yes, you can also do that.
Okay, sir.
You
Thank
can
you.
also do that. Yeah. Yes, Ruben. Ruben.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Please, good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, please, I wanted to ask whether we can have multiple catch blocks to handle different types of exception.
No. Let me answer it in this. Instead of having multiple catch blocks, it's best you put whatever message or statements you have within one catch block. Okay. Unless maybe you are handling different exceptions, even that maybe there's an error. When you wrote your try, within the try, you were handling maybe an arithmetic exception in there. Then another exception, like maybe an array index out of bound exception. So you introduce an array also in your try. Okay. So when you come to the catch, you can put two exceptions there, two messages there, or output messages, or whichever one. You can put two of them there. One for the array, and then one for the arithmetic operation you are doing. However, instead of specifying here to be arithmetic, you just put the exception, because the general class is the exception class. You can see from here. The general class is the exception class, and that exception class is giving you both arithmetic and array index out of bound. You can do it this way, or you can introduce a new try and catch altogether in your program. No one will catch you. No one will penalize you. You can introduce another one where maybe the second one is handling maybe the try and catch for maybe an array. So this time, where this one is an arithmetic array, this one can be array out of an arithmetic exception. This one can be array out of bound exception, where this try and catch or this try has something to do with an array. Do you get it? Ruben, are you with us?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the examples we use when we are introducing a database to our program, you see us implementing multiple try and catch. Okay. So with that one, you need to check whether your code can read from the database API to see if there's actually a connection between your database and your Java code. So you do that, and then there are some other exceptions we can handle. Matthew is saying, say if you're handling exception in Java using try catch block, what happens when an exception occurs within the catch block itself? That's finally. No. Matthew, you didn't really get what we are talking about. The exception cannot happen within the catch block. The catch block is supposed to actually identify the exception and then stop it from coming out, from giving you that output that there is an exception. Okay. Unless you have a different kind of error, maybe a syntax error, you didn't type something well within the catch block. But an exception cannot occur within the catch block. Okay, the catch block is supposed to catch every exception, then output it, handle it for you. Okay. So let me just talk about the last one, which is the throwable or the throw keyword. Okay. That's also related to the question Emmanuel asked if we can introduce it inside the method. Okay, so remember from the previous example where we use if b is equal to 0. Okay, so let me just copy it here and bring it into the method here. If b is equal to 0, we can introduce the throw method. Okay, the throw or the throw keyword. Introduce the throw keyword. So the throw keyword is simply used to throw the actual kind of exception that you want to handle. Okay, so it's used to create or customize the exception that you want to handle. So now we know that the exception we are handling here is an arithmetic exception. So we use throw, and then it comes with the new keyword, the new word, and then we put the arithmetic exception. Okay, then we can now put whatever message we have there and say B, or let's say B is, or B can't be 0. So this is another way you can handle the exception using the throw keyword. What if you introduce the try block and catch block? Henry said, please, if we introduce the try and catch block, does it mean yes? So when you introduce the try and catch block, it means you don't have to use the if-else statement. Like I said, for a beginner, you can use if-else statement to handle this. If I were teaching this in Java 1, I would have used if-else, but now you are in Java 2, so you are using a more detailed approach, okay, which is the try catch. That's the actual or the best way of handling your exception. If you use if-else, you are still a beginner. Okay, so try catch is the way of handling exception. It's the appropriate way of handling exception. And it cuts across every programming language. Every programming language, you need to know how to handle exception. All right. Any other question? Any other question? Any other question?